So just as a brief recap, I just discussed a little bit about one of the major macronutrients being protein. And the second major macronutrient I'll discuss is fat. Fat gets kind of a bad rap, depending on what venue you're talking in. But the fact of the matter is, our bodies need fat.
Yeah.
It's really
The right
important.
fat. It is
The right fat.
It is getting to be the cheerleader in some camps that where it shouldn't really be, as
Right.
far as like with keto and things like that.
Right, right. So the issue with the standard American diet is we get too much fat.
Yeah.
Okay, and the wrong kinds of fat. But the truth of the matter is, our bodies do require fat. Our fat intake is essential for our brain function. It's essential for making hormones. It's essential for making new cells. Everything in our body relies on that. The problem is a healthy intake of fat for the adult human is probably, and there's a little fudge factor in this, but probably around 30 to 35% of your total calories. All right. That's for your average healthy individual. Eating the standard American diet, it's very easy when you're not paying attention to go over 70%
Yeah,
of
it's
your
very
calories.
hard to stay in that 35%.
Yeah.
Almost impossible.
It's a challenge.
Yeah.
If you have type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance that you're trying to
get rid of it.
reverse, the other direction is also difficult. My diet, in order to control my blood sugars without medication, needs to consist of between 10 and 15% of my total calories from fat. So that's a challenge.
And
in
we've
its
had
own
a
right.
dance for trying to get you high enough on your protein, but not loading you up in your fats. So that's been a little
Exactly.
bit of a
Yeah,
challenge.
because they often do kind of travel together. So, what are the basic types of fats? Well, we've got saturated fats. That primarily comes from meat, dairy, and eggs. In the plant-based world, there's very little that makes saturated fats. Coconut is the one thing that really
A little bit in avocado and peanut
Yeah.
and nuts, but very,
small,
very tiny.
very small
Very
amounts.
tiny.
But in terms of really appreciable amounts,
For sure.
yeah. Because you're right. Saturated fats are in just about everything to some degree in terms of anything that contains fat. But in appreciable amounts for our body's metabolism, the main ones are going to be for the saturated fats, meat, dairy, and eggs, and then coconut. Well, what's the big to-do about saturated fat? Well, the problem with saturated fat is when there's too much of it, it starts creating artery clogging plaques.
I remember Dr. Clapper talking about how when he was in surgery and he said, that looks like chicken fat. And he goes, that's because it is chicken fat. And so
Exactly.
anything that's like gelatin kind of in a jar, coconut oil, very just very water-like.
Yeah, to your point, saturated fats tend to be more of a solid at room temperature.
Yeah.
All right. So the next category of fat is going to be unsaturated fat. Well, what's the big deal about saturated versus unsaturated? What that's referring to is a fat molecule is typically made of what's called a glycerol backbone, so to speak, and usually 3 fatty acid chains hooked onto that. All right. And when you're talking about saturated fats, you're talking about each of those fatty acid chains is completely full of hydrogen ions. It's saturated. When you're talking about unsaturated, you're talking about those fatty acid chains that have 1 or more points of not having a hydrogen ion. And what that does is it creates a chemical bond that's a little bit different, and it makes that fat molecule different. How is that observable? Well, typically unsaturated fats are liquid at room temperature. When they get cold, they may appear a little more cloudy. So unsaturated fats are divided into 2 categories, basically. You have monounsaturated fats, which is like olive oil. and then you have polyunsaturated fats. The two most important things that I'm going to talk about regarding polyunsaturated fats are going to be your omega-3 and your omega-6.
This is such a big deal, the omega-3 and the omega-6 thing. It's like so important.
Omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids.
It's amazing to me.
Well, and so what's the big deal about these polyunsaturated fats? That's the omega-3s and omega-6s. Well, these have a lot to do with our body's inflammation status, okay? The standard American diet is chock full of omega-6s.
Yeah.
And a healthy balance of omega-6 to omega-3s, depending on who you talk to, is probably somewhere around 3 parts omega-6 to 1 omega-3, or 4 parts omega-6 to 1 omega-3. Often in the standard American diet, you're getting more than 10 to 1 or 20 to 1.
It's crazy.
Okay. Well, where do so many omega-6s come from? Meat and dairy, primarily. I mean, it comes from other sources.
And the oil.
And oils.
Fried,
yeah,
the processed foods.
Yeah, absolutely. And the processed stuff. So why is that a problem? Well, the omega-6s are pro-inflammatory. So they're the things that when you get these saturated fats in your arteries that are starting to clog up, and you've got too many omega-6s, they're going to lend themselves to that inflammatory response to where you're going to really get those plaques, and it's going to make that worse. On the flip side of that, the omega-3s they tend to be more anti-inflammatory.
They heal those cells.
They heal things, yeah. And so what we're talking about here is, in particular, with people with, specifically with autoimmune issues, this is a really big deal.
Really big deal.
And if you can switch that ratio or make it normal with hypernourishing, one of our favorite plant-based doctors is a Dr. Brooke Goldner, who's got programs to heal autoimmune disease.
You can find her on YouTube, and she has tons of great information for
awesome
free.
Stuff.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what I'm basing this part of my talk on is things that I've learned from her. But if you can change that ratio to something that's more healthy for somebody that's in just this raging inflammatory state,
MS, lupus.
You can reverse it.
Yeah.
And Dr. Brooke Goldner has done this herself. As a teenager, she had stage 4 lupus and kidney disease related to that, and was in terrible shape and on multiple medications. And strictly by reversing this ratio, has cured her illness.
And does not have any lupus markers, does not have any kidney disease. She had stage 4 kidney disease.
So,
and she's helped thousands of people. I can't say enough about her program.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
So
it's like the omega-3s actually are what you need, those omega-3s in high doses if the cells are damaged.
That's right.
Because that's what something I had seen, she had said, and hopefully next time we can bring some of those charts, but that it's brittle almost, and nutrition, even if you're plant-based, can't necessarily get in if you need more omega-3s.
In terms of your ability to absorb more of those nutrients and stuff, even if you're taking it, if your body's in that high inflammatory state, it's going to have a harder time absorbing what you need. Yeah. Exactly.
It's definitely been the case for me.
Yeah. So, wanted to mention here, there's some other things besides what I've talked about that we need fats for. And one of those things outside of what I've already mentioned is if you don't have enough fat in your diet, you're not going to absorb certain nutrients. Specifically, there is a series of fat-soluble vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K, that if you don't have enough fat in your diet, you're not going to absorb those. So again, fat is not necessarily the enemy. The enemy is more what kinds of fat we're getting and how much. That's the issue related to our standard American diet.
Do you have anything to say as far? I learn something new every time we talk about this. You show me something new every time. So nuts have omega-6s, and their ratios are higher
Yes.
than omega-3s, but they're still a good. If you're not out of balance, that's not an issue.
That's correct.
It's not really considered an inflammatory food. Is that right?
Generally speaking, but I think that's something, if you're dealing with
Gotta
an
watch
inflammatory
those.
you want to pay more attention
Right.
to.
Yep.
If you have a normal metabolism, and you don't have any auto-inflammation or auto-inflammatory problems or anything like that, then nuts can be a very good
And you
source
can
of
pull
some
up a
fats.
chart. I don't know. I don't have a reference, but maybe we can put it on your website where it shows how many like nuts, what their ratios will be.
Yeah.
3 to 6.
There's some nuts that are better for lower levels of
Yeah.
omega-6s. Yeah.
Well, I've never heard anybody talk about the omega-3s and 6s until we started talking about it, and it's like
Right.
It's fascinating to me.
Yeah, it really is. So yeah, I suppose I want to re-emphasize the fact here that, while, fats, I think have gotten a bad rap in some areas, and I think in
Rightly so sometimes.
rightly so
Yeah.
in some situations, because again, the problem is not fat per se, but it's the amount that we've gotten.
That's kind of how carbs are too. Like, it's not that carbs are the
exactly
enemy. You'll talk
kind
about
of
that
carbs.
later,
Yes,
but
yes.
but it's
And we've addressed this to some degree already, but what are some of the healthier sources? Where can you get this stuff? Well, in terms of the omega-3s, probably the easiest, healthiest source is flaxseed. And a couple of things we've learned about flaxseed.
And chia seed.
And chia seed. Yeah, chia seed's up there too. But in terms of using flaxseed, you can get it in several different ways. The whole flaxseed, you can get ground flaxseed. You can get flaxseed oil. I would say the ideal way to use flaxseed would be to get a bag of the whole flaxseed. But the problem is we don't get all the goodness out of it unless we grind it.
go straight through you.
It goes straight through you, yeah. So in order to actually take full advantage of the goodness, we need to grind them. Now, here's the problem with buying a bag of already ground flaxseed. The omega-3s oxidize relatively quickly, all right? And I'm sorry, I don't have the exact amount of time it takes, but I would say definitely you want to...
It's minutes. As
Yeah.
far as chia seeds, I know for sure. I don't know
Yeah.
about flaxseed.
What I've heard is if you grind your own, you don't want to let that go more than 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
It may be even shorter than that.
I know for chia seeds it's shorter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
So
the
I
exact-
may have to amend this talk at some point. But I would say...
We're not committing to
Yeah,
it for sure.
the bottom
Okay.
line is you're safest if you get your whole chia seeds, put them in your grinder, grind them up, and use them right there. That's the best way to get the ultimate goodness out of getting all the omega-3s that you can get out of them.
It's been my understanding that when you're counting fat grams, you really don't have to worry about counting the straight flaxseed and chia seeds. Because I kind of avoided them initially, but then I realized that that's just healing the cells. It doesn't really go to the body as fat.
Some other good sources of omega-3s and healthy fats are going to be almonds, walnuts, and hemp seeds. Avocados, great source of plant-based fats. And I don't have an immediate reference to how many omega-3s versus omega-6s with the avocados, but now my guide mentions oils, and there's some controversy about this, I suppose, depending on who you're talking to. But particularly for a guy who's type 2 diabetic, insulin resistant, and trying to reverse that, what's the problem with oils? Well, fats and oils have 9 calories per gram that you intake. Okay, so number one, it's very calorie dense. Number two, when you ingest an oil, how they've made that oil is through a certain amount of processing. And what they do, for instance, with olive oil or any nut oil or anything, what they do is they strip away all the fiber, all the micronutrients, all the other goodness, and phytochemicals and
Now
stuff.
the body knows how to break it down correctly
Right.
without that.
And all you're left with is this glob of oil. That's inflammatory.
And it's hitting the endothelium.
Yeah.
Dr. Esselstyn says every time you
Yep.
have oils, it's a hit on your what? Endothelium.
Endothelial cells. That's right.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
It's a problem.
And so a lot of people talk about the healthy olive oil. Again, I think if you've got a totally normal metabolism, maybe a little bit of that, but keep in mind it's inflammatory and it can damage your endothelium. So,
And something happens when all oils are heated. Something happens on a very
yes, and I was going to get to that,
Yeah.
in terms of fried foods, and that's why fried foods are such a detriment to anybody's health is it does change the chemical composition of the oil and makes it worse for our bodies.
Yeah.
And
It's
in future,
it's real hard to just barely do a little bit of
yeah,
that when
in
you're
future
trying to
podcasts,
solve
I'll
it.
have more information about exactly that process and what it does. But suffice it at this point to say, fried foods are bad. Period. Exception, air fried.
Yeah.
Okay?
Which we
So,
do all the time.
We do all the time. And in fact, I was just talking to somebody today who was talking about her kids loving their air fryers. And she was talking about, but I hate the potatoes I cook with them. And I said, you know why? They don't have the fat in them.
What?
Our tongues, unless we're
That's true.
on
Yeah.
plant-based for
So
a
I
while.
love my air fried French fries.
Oh, yeah. Our tongues on the standard American diet are coated with oil and
And
salt.
that's something I wish people could remember is initially
right.
it's not going to taste the same.
Things are going to taste different.
But our palate is more alive because we aren't coated with fats, sugars,
Exactly.
and salt.
So what my lovely vegan chef here does is she'll chop up the potatoes into French fry sized pieces, and then we'll microwave them.
Because you want them soft on the inside.
You want them soft on the inside,
That's
so
right.
you want them
There's
cooked.
a whole thing to
We'll
it.
microwave them until they're cooked on the inside, and then throw them in the air fryer and get a nice crispy thing going on.
I put
the
lemon
outside.
juice, lime juice on them, and then I put all kinds of seasonings, garlic salt, tahini. So good.
So there is no shortage of potatoes and fries in my house.
And so not guilty,
And so
like,
not guilty.
yeah.
It's fabulous.
you can eat as many potatoes as you want as long as you aren't adding those extra fats
That's
into
right.
it.
Now, a word, again, coming from a guy who needs to limit my total fat intake to 23 grams of fat per day. Avocado is great. One avocado has 15 grams of fat.
Yeah.
So that can be a problem to me.
Yeah.
Just keeping that in mind. The average adult should do well with, a third of their calories coming from fat. So you're talking about 60 grams of fat.
Yeah, and it's like you'll find your rhythm in it too.
Yeah.
It's a lot of information at once, but it's very helpful to know that because that really kind of helps you line out what you do want to give up and what you don't.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think I've addressed all of that.
And I just wish people could understand, like at the end of a plant-based meal, you're full, but you don't have that sluggish kind of just like, I've got to go lay down now.
Well, and I'm going to address something here. Again, we addressed the issue of using chronometer for tracking. And one of my favorite stories about our history with tracking relates to fats. And when I had just found out that I need to limit my fat intake to 23 grams a day to reverse my insulin resistance, we sat down one weekend and Googled what are some of the restaurants we used to go to. And we picked a steakhouse
No
that
names.
we used to go to. I'm not going to use any names, but I'm sure they're all about the same.
Yeah.
And we picked an average meal, like a prime rib or whatever steak we had.
And so you're supposed to have, like, to put it into perspective, you're a day, you're supposed to have how many fat grams?
23 grams.
Okay.
Yeah, 23 grams of fat in a day. And so we put together this average meal where you get your salad with dressing and your meat and your veggies cooked in butter or whatever, and then a little dessert.
Salad dressing has an enormous amount of fat.
Exactly. We were astounded to find almost 400 grams of fat in one meal. One meal. 400. Is it any wonder heart disease is the number one killer of
I
adults
wish
in this
people
country?
understood that. I wish people
Yeah.
understood. I mean, it grieves me to see that, and not to be melancholy, but it's like it's so important. It's so great to have the hope of being able to transform your life through nutrition.
Yes.
It's such a gift.
It is. So in conclusion, a couple of take-home points. I would like to remind everybody that all fats aren't bad. Our bodies need fats. There are healthy fats to be had. Think about your omega-3s more than your omega-6s, and you'll kind of reverse some of the inflammatory processes that you have. And I'll close with a little quote here saying, healthy fats fuel our bodies and minds. Embrace them in your plant-based journey.
There you go. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.